This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, share meeting. Okay, can you see this slide, Ed?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. See the whole thing, right? Okay.
I see Deconstructing UFO Technologies, Benjamin T. Solomon.
Okay, great. Now we'll wait a few minutes for everybody else to come on board. So how are you doing?
I'm doing well considering I'm sheltered in place.
Oh, yeah, so am I. But I have to, but because I do Uber, I have to get out. I cannot sit still for too long.
Well, I got out and walked around the neighborhood.
Oh,
And anytime I met anyone going the other way, we would keep a sizable distance between us.
right. Actually, I checked some of the statistics. I went to 1.3 acres. It was started by a Chinese Canadian, a Canadian Chinese, and his friends out in China. And they are reporting exact numbers that's happening in Canada and the US. And I looked at the data, and they have people to verify. They have volunteers to verify all the statistics they put on board. And it looks like the growth rate has leveled.
And I heard that it had leveled off in China. But
Yeah, no, that's the infections has leveled off. Here, the growth rate has leveled off. So now the infections should start coming down.
well, I'm getting used to doing telepresence meetings.
We're
A
all
lot
going
of
to
the
get,
other meetings are using Zoom.
yeah, we're all going to get used to it. I used GoToMeetings before, and I like it.
Yeah. By the way, I do not have a webcam on my desktop computer, so that's why you don't see me.
Okay.
It's not that
Good.
I'm trying to be rude or anything.
Yeah, it's we haven't developed teleportation technologies. Otherwise, I will teleport the camera to you. Okay. Shall we give a few more minutes, or shall we start?
I'm in no hurry because I have two screens on my computer, and I can do other things on the other screen, so it's not a problem for me.
Yeah, I think I'll give it a few more minutes.
Okay.
Shall we start?
Uh,
Oh, one person just joined.
Hi, Ben. Mike here.
Hi, Mike.
Okay.
How's it going?
I'm emailing a couple of guys that I was talking to yesterday who I thought said they were going to try and attend. So I'll ping them right now.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it might take a few minutes for some to figure the link and install it and all that.
Yeah, it's a non-trivial link.
Non-trivial length. What do you mean non-trivial length?
Non-trivial. It's a non-trivial startup process for the link, to start with the link and to
Oh, I see.
download and start it running. And so I know exactly what Mike's talking about.
Oh, I see.
So in a previous life, I was teaching at Carnegie Mellon, Silicon Valley, there at Moffett Field.
Right.
And we specialized in a master's in software engineering.
Right.
And we emphasized that the students did not have to be local.
Right.
And we recognized many years ago that software teams today are often quite geographically dispersed.
Right.
So we encouraged students from outside the Bay Area to apply, and we tried to incorporate them into our program as much as possible. So what
Right.
was unique about this is that almost all of the courses, the students worked in teams in just about every course. And so
Right.
some teams had mixtures of local students and remote students, and sometimes there were teams that were all local, and some teams that were all remote.
Right.
So I don't know why, but I got into enjoying having remote students. And in fact, sometimes when we would have a team that was mixed, to put everybody on the playing field, we had the local students also call in and act as and participate as remote.
Oh, I see.
So I got very used to doing this, and we didn't have the video like you have now.
Yeah.
And so everything was audio, and I got very good at being able to recognize voices just on the phone.
Yeah. It expands the scope of people who can reach you.
Yeah.
If you do it.
So, for example, I actually had a student in Korea.
Oh, wow.
And he was one of the remote students. And I actually met him once. And I had another student from Saudi Arabia, and I also met him once.
Right.
And the fellow from Saudi Arabia was very dedicated. He would get up, because the team would meet like at 7 p.m., like this time at night.
Yeah.
And this student would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning so that he could call in and participate in the team meetings.
Right.
So it was a very unusual situation. When I first started, I did have one remote student that I never did meet, and he never came to graduation. So he was just a voice on the phone. But he was an exception. He was also a very good student, by the way.
Right.
Is that Rob? Rob? Is that Rob from Quantum?
Hey, Rob.
You're muted.
Yeah, sometimes it won't see your mic and you end up muted
Well, Rob had trouble yesterday, and he had to be logged in twice for some reason. Some microphone he wanted to use couldn't work, and so he had to do one on the cell phone and one on a computer, and I didn't understand the situation. But I think that's who Rob is.
Yeah.
Yep, there he is twice.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Rob.
Hi. Who is R? This video is being recorded.
Everybody gets a message about that, so.
Hi. Shall we wait a few more minutes or shall I start?
How many people signed up?
10.
Okay, so I would figure 50%, especially with what's going on, is a rough guesstimate.
Okay. Usually what I see is 50% or less will show up, and the rest who show up haven't signed up.
Mm.
Okay, let's do this. Let's start.
Well, I can do a quick tweet for you and see what happens.
Okay.
I have to do the meetup link, not the GoToMeeting link, right? No, the GoToMeeting link is open. Okay. Well, actually, I'll do the meetup link anyway, just because it's
More direct.
It's easier to kind of market from there. Let's see. Might be easier to do it from the phone.
How do you do it from the phone? Is there
You
a
have to
phone?
go to the Meetup app, find the Meetup, and then there's a share button somewhere. Looks like 9 people registered. So I will simply go share and then to Twitter.
Oh yeah, it is 9 people without including me.
Yeah, and I'm going to CC somebody who I know likes the stuff. What was his name?
Was he in the quantum group?
No. He's just a guy on Twitter that enjoys the UFO thing, but his handle is different from his name, so I have to look him up. Desmoden. He starts with an underscore. His name must have been taken. Okay. The tweet is out to about 5,000 people. We'll see who's paying attention.
Thanks.
You're welcome. In the meantime, if you want to give some background on what you did to maybe prepare for the presentation and where it comes from. I think some of us know, but not everyone.
Okay. I spent about 20 years digging into the foundations of physics from the point of view of data. because I learned how to deal with data through my training, Masters in Operations Research, and then I had a ton of experience using those skills in my Masters in Finance, and my Master's thesis in Finance was about 553 pages. And it was on a topic that nobody considered important. It was unsystematic risk, because modern theories in finance basically says that unsystematic risk is fully diversified away. And I proved that it's not. The minimum unsystematic risk you have is about 4% in a portfolio. It actually rises much higher. And if you look at cases like Enron and WorldCom, it tells you that unsystematic risk never diversified away. You can reduce some of it, but it's never diversified away.
Can you explain what the unsystematic risk is?
Unsystematic risk is the risk that exists, which is not market risk. It's driven by management behavior, by experimental forces, by the economy, but it's not the market risk. It's not market risk. Again, here I will deviate slightly from established finance, because one of the things I showed was that the market capital of a firm is directly a function of its total assets. And so from that, you can tell what's the median price of a firm's share price should be. And everything else around that number is your investor's expectation. So if you hear there's bad news about a company, the share price dives. That's investors responding to the bad news, not the company. The company's total asset hasn't changed, and so its market cap is still the same. How investors are responding to the news of the company. Of course, if bad managers are also part of unsystematic risk. And so I use that skill to go back and look at what was in our the data found in fundamental physics. Let me start this because it actually shows you where we are. So the three major discoveries I made, actually there's a lot more, but the three most important one is this equation. This equation, which is the gravitational acceleration is independent of the mass of the body, the planet or the star. And it's basically, if you look at it, as an object falls into a gravitational field, time slows down. And so that change, very roughly, it's that change in the time dilation divided by that height difference times by c squared will give you that acceleration, gravitational acceleration. So what that means is that you can produce gravitational fields without the use of mass.
Yeah, that is pretty significant.
Yeah, I discovered this in 2007. I spent the first several years trying out experiments, got really nowhere. And then I decided, hey, I have a skill, why don't I use it, which was modeling. And so I discovered this formula in 2007. And the second one that came much later was this equation here, that the gravitational constant is not a constant. It is an inverse. It has an inverse relationship to the mass of the isotope. and I can look up what KISO is. I didn't put it in there, but it's basically a constant. So that basically says that the heavier the mass of the isotope, the weaker the gravitational coefficient. And so from that, the natural conclusion, the natural effect of that is that as stars burn hydrogen, nuclear synthesis, the gravitational coefficient of the star reduces. And because it reduces, the planets move away from each other, stars move away from each other, galaxies move away from each other, and it appears that the universe is expanding.
That's
But
very clever.
Yeah, I haven't done the calculations for that because that's a lot more involved. But that is the conceptual extrapolation.
Can you say again what capital G sub I is in that equation?
That is the gravitational coefficient. I've replaced the gravitational constant with the gravitational coefficient.
And how does that differ from little g?
Little g is acceleration.
Oh, okay. One is a coefficient and the other is acceleration. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, John, thanks for joining us.
Hi.
Yep, happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
If you want to do a retweet, maybe we get some more people. This is good stuff.
Yep, totally agreed. We'll do so.
Okay, and then I did in the later years, which is in the last 5, 6, 7 years, I looked at probability and randomness. One of the things that really upset a lot of contemporary physicists is that I've came up with an alternative to the Schrodinger wave function. It's much simpler. It actually, I wouldn't say I came up with it. I went back to the historical formulas that if you search for it on the internet now, you won't find it. It's been completely removed. But it's posted back in my papers, and that you can actually derive it from the point spread function, which is basically the rings. Where if you pass photons through a pinhole, it'll form rings, and I've shown it in one of my earlier sessions. And what I showed was that you can take that image and interpolate, so to speak, back to the pinhole, and you can derive this equation, which is the equation that used to be used to describe the point spread function. Now it's completely replaced by stuff like Bessel functions and Schrodinger wave function. In fact, when Feynman asked Schrodinger how he had discovered the wave function, he had no answer. He just kept quiet. He had no answer. So that's a model that does not have a derivation that's based on real facts, real data. And so that's the weakness of it. And the problem with that is that physics gets really complicated because you are starting off with a really complicated equation. And cutting it short, I showed that the probability and randomness are two different behavior. Probability is derived from the photon. The photon has a probability field. All particles have a probability field. It's derived from that. Whereas randomness is derived from the electron shell structure on the material which the photon hits. So the photon, when it hits a material, it might be absorbed by the electron shell, or might not be, depending on whether the electron shell is ready to accept the photon. And the reason why I went into that quite deeply is because gravity modification cannot give you interstellar propulsion. No matter what anybody says, it cannot give you interstellar propulsion simply because it comes up against Lorentz Fitzgerald transformation and the Newtonian gravitational transformation. That is the equivalent of the Lorentz Fitzgerald transformation in gravity. And it didn't have a name. You can look it up. It doesn't have a name, so I gave it a name. I gave it Newtonian gravitational transformations. And so when you come up against those two transformations, your mass increases to infinity as your velocity increases to the speed of light. So there's no way around it. The only way you're going to get around that is to figure out how probabilities work. And when you look at probabilities, they are time invariant. I'll get into this. This was my philosophy of why I used a different approach, because if 100,000 scientists after 100 years have not been able to solve for gravity modification, then who am I? I don't have that kind of theoretical background. My colleague has. I'll refer to him in further down in the slides. His name is Dr. Andrew Beckwith. He graduated with a PhD in condensed matter physics from the University of Houston. I believe it's the Semicon Center of Excellence, and now he's in New York State. Okay, and so my focus was actually to look at the data which nature has, because you can look at theoretical physicists as a group of board of directors. They vote together because it's all by consensus. They vote on which is the acceptable theory. But there's one seat on the board, that is nature. And nature has the veto. We see that veto when theories break down. The other requirement.
For new ideas and innovation, you can't rely on experts, right? Because they're already in tune with a different theory. Yes,
and you have to come up with something different, something new. And the requirement is that this requirement is very important. Let me change it. Okay, this requirement is important. When you come up with a new theory, you have to not only explain existing phenomena, but you have to propose new phenomena that is testable, which is a very severe weakness of all string theories. String theories cannot be tested. Okay, we know about this. Most of you will know about this snowflake. When I asked the question, how big is the snowflake? The reason why I asked that question is because I wanted to point out that a lot of people see what they know, but they do not know how to know what you see. And I don't know whether that's the failing of our education system, or it's something that it's a weakness of all humans.
So I heard a recent explanation about this, and one is we have limited senses, right? Our human senses, and we design equipment that measure using similar means. And then number two is we use our mind by programming it to do certain things. We're pre-programmed, right? We learn about things. We get into our own patterns, societal, technical, and otherwise. And so when we look at something like this snowflake, if that's what it is, right? We get all these patterns, but we're not conditioning ourselves or reprogramming ourselves to see the unknown, to see something new.
Yes.
And so those are very rare events that we need to program ourselves to see, to even begin to bring into our sphere of awareness.
Yes. But I would take it a little bit further. I would say that if we step back and look at, try and see what the big picture is, we might be able to see something different. But we need guides. Theories are guides. Data are guides. So if we use those two correctly, then we are much better able to know what we see.
Unfortunately, that's not what's happening in the world today.
Yeah, unfortunately. Okay. So the other point was Sabine Hossenfelder out of Germany. She does a lot of blog postings, and I listen to her a lot. She's still very much into contemporary physics, but she believes that one thing that came across very clearly was that mathematics is not physics. That's what she said. You can do a lot of things with mathematics, but there are only some things you can do with that mathematics in the physics. So you have to be very, very disciplined in how you use the mathematics to work the physics. I like what she says. A lot of what she says is very down to earth and very sensible. And she's somebody I would recommend that you follow her blogs.
Indeed. Have you seen any of the work from William Tiller?
No, his name sounds familiar, but I don't.
Yeah, he has the Tiller Foundation. He's been doing research on consciousness and how it affects the double slit experiment, for example.
Yeah.
And has come up with very interesting ways to explain what's actually happening, and has come up with a new model of how we should be modeling it.
Yeah.
And where physics kind of went wrong.
Okay. That's somebody worth looking up. My view is, my approach is different in that I have a need to be an extreme rationalist because I grew up in an environment where there was a lot of superstitions. So one day I decided, that's it, enough, chuck all these superstitions. And with that superstitions, you find there's misinformation, there's marketing propaganda, all that stuff mixed in with it. And so now if I'm very focused on, can I derive a formula? If I cannot derive a formula, I'm either wasting time or this is outside my field. So I'm very, very disciplined in my focus. But Morris Klein, in his book, The Loss of Certainty, he said that mathematics has become so powerful that it can be used to prove anything. And strings come back to mind. The joke in the physics community among non-string theories is that string theories can be used to prove anything provided somebody else has discovered it. So that is the feeling. Again, it keeps telling, there are all these red flags coming up that tells the community, hey, there's a really serious problem with string theories. But when I've talked to, on my trips, I've met a lot of physicists, and my conferences I've met a lot of physicists, and they tell me the reason why they are focused on string theories is because it is a bridge between quantum theory and other phenomena. So that's why it's a means to expanding quantum theory to explain a lot of other things. And my thinking is, okay, if you start off the wrong footing, you can prove anything. It's equivalent to this. The reason why I say string theories are all wrong is because my formula G is equal to tau c squared, I modeled it as a particle that is a spherical particle that contracts according to Newtonian's gravitational transformation. You take the particle and you slice it down into, let's say, 1,000 pieces, and each slice has a slightly different contraction based on how far it is from the source of the gravitational field. And when you model a particle that way, all the transformation, not just contraction, or contraction is the most important for physical shape. When you model it that way, then you get G is equal to tau c squared. So that basically tells me that any theory that says particles expand with velocity is wrong. Nature, Lorentz Fitzgerald transformation and Newtonian gravitational transformation, nature has already made it clear that that's not what happens. My opinion is that string theories came about as an expansion because of tidal gravity. That means if an object falls into a gravitational field, what happens is it gets longer and longer and longer. The part of the object that's closer to the gravitational source is literally running away at a faster acceleration than the part of the object that's further away from the gravitational source. So it looks like it's expanding, but if you break it up, you find that if you require Lorentz Fitzgerald transformation and Newtonian gravitational transformation to be valid, because that's what nature says is happening, then you find that what happens is that the individual particles in the object are contracting, but the space between the two particles, any two particles, is increasing. So that's how you would explain the elongation of objects in a gravitational field while being consistent with lift and NGT, Newtonian gravitational transformation. So that's another nail in the coffin for string theories. But yeah, you cannot have an environment where you don't have formulas. As a rationalist, I need to see a formula. But if you don't have a formula, it probably means that you don't have all the facts, or you're in a field where the facts cannot be quantified. And I'm really glad Maurice Klein said this, because it makes a lot of sense.
If I can just interject really quick, I'm just sorry I didn't say something earlier. My daughter came home, but I really think that people are starting to catch on that string theory, was quite possibly a wonderful exercise, in how far we can go with mathematics. And there was a lot of fantastic mathematics that was created for it. But if you look at there's an amazing number of researchers that were into string theory that are very quietly moving themselves away from it. You take someone like Leonard Susskind over at Stanford, who was quite a proponent and now is primarily talking information theory and so forth. And even if you look at the Large Hadron Collider, that was built for the sole purpose officially of finding some many different points of evidence of string theory. And the fact that they spent that much money and have been at it for this long, and yeah, they could see higher energy levels, but right now I don't know, among some of the physicists I talk to, string theory is dead in the water. It's just taking a long time for people to realize that it's probably not their best place to put their effort.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I talked to a PhD student about a year ago, and what she said, I asked her what she was specializing in, and she said string theories, but they're not really strings. So there is a move away, but yet not. So it obviously says that there's a lot of confusion in the theoretical physics community regarding this type of work, but it's left to be seen what really happens eventually.
And I mean, let's be honest. These are big machines that get created. I mean, you consider the number of all sorts of programs have been set up, all sorts of people that grew up in that string theory realm and now are advisors, and so now are basically guiding their students in that way. It's going to take a long time for this stuff to kind of turn around. And we do have some interesting new work going on. I like the quantum loop gravity stuff that Carlo Rovelli's been working on.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the quantized inertia that Mike McCulloch has been working on. There's a couple others that I've run into, over the last year. And these are all, I mean, who's to say which one's going to come out on top? But what I like about most of these is these are actually hypotheses that can be tested.
Yeah.
We really went off the reservation when it came to string theory, as far as letting people go much, much further off the pier without having some sort of a gut check when it comes to experimentation.
Yeah. But there's a lot of politics in physics. It's not going to be easy to change.
No.
Niels Bohr said it best. What he said was, the status quo theories are not going to change until the generation that supported those theories die off, until the professors die off. That's what he said.
Absolutely. And and the thing is that I think we're starting to see a slow sea change where people are starting to realize that it's not always about what you know, it's about how you learned it and what you did with it. And I'm hoping that we start seeing this more in science, where people stop getting quite so tied to things. But let's be honest, if you'd spent the last 30 years of your life doing string theory, and string theory work is what got you your yeah, exactly. Turning on that is something that most people's egos just can't handle. And quite honestly, depending on the state of that university, could actually put their position at risk. So, and everyone's got to eat. So, it's hard, but it's kind of human.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't think things are going to change anytime soon, unless somebody upstairs intervenes. By upstairs, I mean God.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, agreed. I mean, but we could definitely see. I mean, you take something like the Navy Tic Tac Nimitz event, and the behavior of that vehicle has basically kind of opened up a door for a lot of folks who had trouble talking about alternative hypotheses to actually start speaking of their alternative hypotheses, because we now potentially have an object that seems to have been defying all of our models. And so sometimes you do get, celestial events, tic-tac events, whatever kind of event where, someone sees a behavior somewhere that is so far out of scope of what we understand that it kind of opens the door for people who were already having these ideas, just didn't feel safe to share them, to then start sharing them,
Yes. I've been doing that for the last 21 years. But the problem I see is that I cannot get published in the premier journals, simply because I don't have a PhD in physics and I'm not attached to academia. What I found was I tried to even post some of my published papers on arXiv, and they immediately rejected it. So
yeah, and to be very honest with you, it's not just because you don't have a PhD. I am absolutely amazed the nightmare experience that Mike McCulloch is having trying to get papers published. I mean, you're talking about papers where he has experimental evidence, he has done some amount of pre-peer review. It's based on stuff he's doing for a DARPA grant, right? And they will reject his paper completely, like automatically, just because they essentially feel they don't have anyone that would review it that would actually take it seriously, right? And he's not the only one. I mean, on a different thread, Dr. Dean Radin, who does a lot of the more phenomenon-based research and on human capabilities and so forth. But a lot of he has some very base root papers that are just looking at, probability variations based on conscious activities, right? And these are really, really stripped down, really basic, real, mathematical. Hey, this is just the distribution, right? This is just the data. And like, he had one paper accepted, and basically was about to get published, and the main guy had called him up and said, I'm pulling your paper. And he's like, why? And he goes, because essentially one of my core donors called me up and said I better, and that was the end of it, right? And I mean, Dean's got a fantastic academic background, right? So and a lot of those papers he was publishing with other people. There was one guy in particular, I can't remember his name. He'd published 25 papers so far in some really great, I mean, like, things like, Nature and crazy things like that. And he does one paper with Dean, and basically it's the first time he's ever had a paper rejected in his entire career. And and it's all just because there are certain taboo topics that just really set people off in a big way. Even the meetups. I tried to propose a leaner, low energy nuclear reaction meetup like maybe like 4 years ago, and it got flat out denied. They wouldn't let me build. They wouldn't let me start it, and they wouldn't give me a reason.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Right.
There is a certain process that is still broken, where independent and innovative research cannot get through because the process isn't designed to allow it to come through. If there's nobody qualified to review it, they reject it, right? That's the default. That should not be the default.
Yes.
So there needs to be a new process in place to be able to accept innovation, regardless if we understand it or not, and be able to support it to the next step, whatever that is, and then decide if it's worth merit or it should be rejected or put into the pile that we can't validate.
Yeah. Okay. Good suggestions, but it's going to take a while. Let's go on to this next topic. Okay, what does UFO mean to you? It's not what women often say to men. Unidentified flying objects. Actually, the deeper understanding is that it's unidentified physics of flying objects. That's basically what UFOs imply. That's the implicit assumption behind UFOs. Okay, I think some of you have already seen this. If I play this, this is the Pentagon admitting. Wait a minute. Okay. This is the Pentagon. Wait, let me. Okay, this is the Pentagon admitting that that UFOs do exist. They changed the name to UAP, which I think is annoying. And this was released by To the Stars Academy. Hal Puthoff is there, and a few other people. Hal Puthoff is a physicist who proposed that space-time is polarized in a gravitational field. Why is this not moving? Oh, they're describing all the features. How many of you have seen this video?
I have. Actually, the audio is actually quite interesting if you can play it.
So while we're playing with that, William Tiller has an interesting idea and paper on why classical physics is wrong by only taking into account the reference frame that is space-time only. And that single reference frame is so limiting that we can't get out of it. And so once you add a secondary reference frame, you have new ways to describe all the phenomena that we see but don't have a way to test or explain.
What is this?
It's a paper called The Last Century's Quantum Mechanics is Relevant
Right.
in a Duplex. So he proposes a duplex reciprocal subspace reference frame.
Right. Okay. Let me go to the next slide. Okay. This is I would presume some of you have already seen this. This is NASA's best effort. It's a rocket that it's X-43A, and the fastest it's gone is Mach 10, which is very different in properties to what we see in UFOs. And I won't show this because. Okay, now this simple explanation, why don't we have this technology, the UFO technology? Because there's bugs in the mathematics. I talked to some people and they said, yes, we have seen papers where the plus sign should have been a minus sign, but the author refused to change it and left it as this. So there are a lot of bugs in a lot of the papers that have been published. And there are axiomatic errors in the theoretical physics. And the big issue is basically legacy physics. I'll come to axiomatic errors in a while. Okay, so deconstruct, if we take the UFO observations and we structure it, there are a couple of questions we can ask, which is there an interaction with the external environment? Do these crafts use thrust, and what type of engines we have? And this is from the UK National Archives. It's all the various types of UFOs. I presume it is. It hasn't been updated because now we have the triangle UFO. So in this experiment, this video shows a spacecraft UFO flying across the moon. So we know that they can travel in a vacuum, and they can travel in vacuum, and they can travel in air, and they can travel in sea, because it's been reported that UFOs have come out of the oceans or entered the oceans. So they exhibit no resistance to the external environment, and there's no interaction, because you do not see any kind hear or see any kind of shock waves. He puts a circle around this so you can see it moving. are there. But I cannot, the image is too grainy. I cannot see what's going on there, but it probably has to be shown on a bigger screen to be able to see what's happening. Occasionally you can see a dark patch moving. So the requirement here is that the craft is enclosed in some kind of bubble that does not alter space-time, which clearly means we don't have the technology because we have no ability to modify space-time.
It means it's in a different reference frame.
We'll come back to that in a little later. Okay. Let me stop that and let's go to the next slide. Okay, this photo basically says that there are no exhaust, there are no contrails, there's no sonic boom. So the requirement is that technology must bypass Newton's third law of motion, which is basically equal and opposite reaction. The phenomena must be local to the craft, otherwise it will affect everybody around it. And also it must be short range. Local to the craft basically says that it is the motion system, the transportation system is within the aircraft itself, and it's short range, so it envelops the whole aircraft. Okay, here, so the engines must have this ability to bypass these three requirements, N3M, lift, and NT, to be able to achieve impossible velocities and impossible gravitational acceleration. The second thing we see is that they must be scalable because they come in all shapes and sizes. So again, it is local to the craft, and it's a short range effect. And this very okay. Okay, so that's an example of a UFO moving without thrust. And actually, if you consider the bright lights as some kind of thrust, it's in the wrong direction. Okay, so first, to sum it up, the technology bypasses Newton's third law of motion. It bypasses Lorentz-Fitzgerald transformation, and it bypasses Newtonian gravitational transformation, which are bedrocks of current physics. So basically, what the inference is, it's not happening in our space-time continuum. Somehow, the technology bypasses the space-time continuum and does not require velocities as a means of travel. Which, Rob, you're saying it's a different frame of reference. That different frame of reference is still in our existing space-time. So there's something in nature that is different with that we have not been able to observe. That is, there's a possibility of existing outside our space-time.
Yeah, from my perspective, they're using a frequency type technology to move to different locations by changing their frequency.
Okay, that's a possibility, but I wouldn't know how to begin with that kind of inference, because I go back to the original foundations of physics and then try to rebuild upwards. And if you look at our contemporary theories, quantum theories basically says that force is carried by particles, and the field source is mass. And what we need is a new method. The only thing we can observe in nature right now is probabilities, and how do you control those probabilities. And the beauty of why probabilities fit into a UFO type technology is because probabilities are time invariant and space invariant. They are fixed. And so if we know how to control our probabilities, then we have an approach to building a new type of technology. Okay, and a lot of the work I've done, and these are all the stuff I'm talking about is published in peer-reviewed journals. So what I've said is that there are different types of space-time. The space-time that we know of, and I call them keno, it's derived from the Greek for vacuous. There's space-time where it's X, Y, Z, and T, that is where you see motion. And you can show that force is actually carried by space-time. And because particles exactly mirror the transformations present in space-time, you can develop a theory of force that is based on particle exchange, which is what quantum theory is. But if you start digging down deeper, you find that force is actually carried by space-time, and therefore you have gravitational fields. There's a second type of space-time, it's called subspace, which is where probabilities are implemented. There's no time dimension. That's why probabilities are time invariant. I've put out quite a substantial amount of work also published in peer-reviewed journals of how probabilities are implemented in nature. It's not a question that quantum theory dare ask or string theories dare ask. It's not a question for general relativity, because general relativity doesn't deal with probabilities. So, and there's a third type of space-time, which is variable electric permittivity, which is the space-time of nucleus, and you see it as binding energy. And you can, for those of you who are interested, you can read up my papers. It's all available on the internet. So this is how, and it explains a lot of things. This approach explains a lot of things, because in the electron shell, when there's a join between subspace and space-time, then it's only then do you get photon localization. And that join is also the reason for randomness. So there's a lot of evidence that points to that in that direction. The other thing that points in this direction is the transverse electromagnetic wave. If you look at the field, electric and magnetic field, they are essentially oscillating between 0% and 100% field strength. And that energy, if you require that energy is conserved even at that detail, then you find that the transverse wave breaks conservation of energy. The only way to resolve that is to have the electric and magnetic field vectors rotate between space-time and subspace. And so you get what you see in space-time is the projection of that rotation, and energy is conserved. It's all mathematically written down. So the theory so far requires very strict conservation rules, and it explains a lot more of the phenomena than most people think it does. If you read a lot of the physics papers that are being published break these conservation rules, so that tells you those papers are not correct. They are mathematical conjecture. So whatever theory, whatever engineering we want to develop, those rules have to be very strictly adhered to. Then let's look at the 2 US patents. This was 2006. It's a TR3B, and basically when you break down this, you have a positive conducting plate, a positive conducting plate here. Can you see my cursor moving? And a negative conducting plate here. Can you see my cursor? You can, huh? Okay.
Yes.
And you have a parabolic antenna here, which creates the EM waves. This is according to the patent. And you have an array of horizontal slots over here. And these 3 hemispheres somehow control the motion of the craft. And there are no references to published papers. So this is a plot of electric field, Hodge-Star operator. And I asked my friend and colleague, Dr. Andrew Beckwith, what are Hodge-Star operators? He said it is a very complex mathematical theory to do something like this. And for him, he's a guy who has corrected the mathematics of other theoretical physicists. And for him to say that it's very complex, it is really complex, because mathematics is wrapped around his little finger. So I don't see why you have a pattern, nice pattern of electric fields. I don't see why you have to have this pattern. The arrows point the direction of the field direction, and the lines are the contours of field strength. Okay, that's not anything new. Okay, what they say in this pattern, it's a vertically oscillating electric field, EM wave, vertically oscillating, coming out of this with a horizontal electric field here. Okay, this horizontal electric field is stationary. It's with reference to the body of the craft, and the interaction is supposed to cause a space-time curvature that is evidenced as force. I feel like saying really, because as far as we know, photons are very, very stable, and nothing really can change how they behave. But having said that, there is an experiment that I've proposed, and I'll come to that in a little while. Okay, so the question is, can electric field be used to polarize transverse EM waves? And can transverse EM waves interact with an orthogonal electric field? From the work I've done, I know this is wrong. Orthogonal is wrong. It has to be in the plane of the oscillation of the electric field. It cannot be orthogonal to the electric field. It has to be in the same plane. So that's one. From my perspective, that's an error. Can it be used to polarize transverse EM waves? Yes and no. After all, when you use materials to polarize photons, you're basically using the electric field of the electron shell. But can we do it as a raw naked electric field? Nobody has ever achieved that yet. So this is doubtful whether we can use raw electric field to polarize transverse EM waves. Let's look at the second pattern. It's 2018, and this is TR3B black triangle. All the figures are taken out of the pattern, and they have reference to 6 papers. And we'll go through all of these papers very quickly. I'll briefly summarize those papers. The first paper basically requires 0-point energy, which is basically quantum vacuum fluctuations. And the thing about this is they have used acoustic disturbance models to model electromagnetic disturbance in space. Yeah, you could do that. The problem is your model valid for such an interpretation? I haven't seen the model, and based on a lot of my work, I tend to think that when you do such radical transformations from a longitudinal wave model to a transverse wave model, you're going to get results that you want to see, because you can always, there are so many things you can tweak. There was a paper recently, a news article recently, about somebody having discovered, I believe, phonons that behave like negative mass. And when you start reading the paper, it's really a completely different, two very different types of modeling versus phenomena. So you can get lots of strange results if you do this kind of comparison. And I'm not in favor.
Yeah, but I'm glad you brought that up, because that was a really interesting paper, because what you basically had was almost an analogous situation where it was displaying the type of behavior we would expect to see in the negative matter, but it essentially, you're dead on, the way it was being done and what was behind it was completely different than anything that we've been looking for as far as how you actually do this.
Yes, and the photo they showed, it didn't show you a gravity neutralized space above the material. So it immediately tells you it's not gravity modifying. Okay, the second paper was conditional possibility of spacecraft propulsion. I could not find this paper. So we don't know what's in this paper, what they referred to.
So only 5 of the 31 papers have actually been released. Several of them are in the domain control of the group that did the research. So if you reach out to the author of the document, there's a chance that they might offer it to you. They are all available within the basically the TSSCI framework that allows researchers to reach out to it. So, and it's actually, those 31 papers are some of the most heavily pulled papers that they have now. So, and there are certain people that have seen other other papers that haven't been published, but to my knowledge, only 5 of those papers are actually available to the public.
Okay. And I will, let me finish this a little bit more, and then you'll understand why I'm coming to the conclusion I'm coming to. Polarizable vacuum. This was proposed by Hal Puthoff. He is now part of To the Stars Academy, and basically he says that there's a way of changing permittivity and permeability of space, and therefore of modifying gravity. That's basically what he's saying. Okay, this is possibly real. This paper referred to has no relevance to the patent. It's his Nobel speech. Okay, and this one, Hayasaka and Takeuchi, they did an experiment. I read this paper many years ago, and the reason why I talk about it is because they took a disk, spun it to 13,000 RPMs and dropped it. Essentially what they did, and they detected a slight deviation in the gravitational acceleration. The Chinese, Lu and all, subsequently tried to reproduce the experiments, and they could not. Now, if you when you have one paper saying yes, it's true, another paper saying no, it's not, then it's debatable which way you can go, and it's basically how you want to perceive things that makes that helps you decide which way you're going to go. But my work on Lathwaite's big wheel experiment, which is you spin a disc, and it's attached to a rod, and you rotate that rod, you will see a weight change up or down, depending on whether the spin is the spins are the same, spin and rotation are the same sense or different sense. And that basically proves you have to have them orthogonal. That basically proves that the Chinese null experiment is correct, because spinning a disk at 13,000 RPM is not going to change its weight without a rotation that's orthogonal to that spin. So we know that this paper is not correct.
There's another person, John, this was recent, British inventor who had several gyroscopic movements of items that were fixed to a table stand, right? And then as they spun, it moved and apparently changed the gravitational coefficient of that device so that the device changed shape. Yes,
that I looked at it and decided it's too complicated to deconstruct. I used Lathwaite's big experiment because Lathwaite's the guy who.
So real quick, are you talking about the inner NASA stuff? I can't remember the chap's name, but because you're not talking about the EM drive stuff, right? You're talking about
no, I'm not talking
multiple gyroscopes, right?
Yes, this is
yeah. So the interesting side note to that is that Innersan, who is now in a lawsuit having to do with some stuff that was developing, and I've seen demonstrations of this gyroscopic device, and from what I can, at least visually, it seems to be able to at least visually achieve, maybe like an inch or two. I've had seen no evidence that it actually is consistent, or that it scales, or that there isn't some other explanation for what's happening. But the one interesting point I will add is that Harold Puthoff was with InterNASA working on that before he joined TTSA. Right. And so there is kind of a weird connection between those two. The other thing I wanted to just say real quick, and I'm going to give you a short version of this, but to me it's an interesting story. It was basically it was told by a guy named Edward Fouché many years ago, and he was talking about some of the very early development of a rotating plasma that would provide a change in basically rest inertia, basically mass. And the thing I liked about the story is it has a lot of interesting kind of human elements to it. And basically the way the story goes, the short version is they had spent 10 plus years, an obscene amount of money working on this, and they had this rig together, and they brought a bunch of generals and different full bird type stuff to this warehouse to demonstrate it, and they essentially turn it on, and nothing happens. And they go around checking everything and tweaking everything and checking everything, and nothing happens. And 10, 15 minutes goes by and still nothing's happening. There's a loud noise, there's a hum, there's obviously power to it, but nothing's happening. And the generals start getting frustrated and they start kind of walking off. And one of the engineers who was working on it got really frustrated and kicked the framework. And this is my understanding is this was a pretty large framework, maybe like 30 by 30 feet sort of a thing. And he kicked it, and the entire framework lifted up and skipped down the warehouse. It actually traveled like 90 feet or something like that. And basically, according to that story, what they achieved was something around like an 89% reduction in mass. And and the thing is that I've seen Fouché's presentations on how he thinks that works. He's not a physicist, so he was taking a swat at it, and it's a decent swat. I don't have any evidence to show that this is real, but I tend to key on historical stories where there are very naturally human evident elements to the story. And this to me is a very, very interesting story. And there's a longer version of it, but that's basically the nut of it. So that's all.
Okay. I tend to believe, because of the work I've done on deconstructing Lathwaite's big whale experiment, you can actually prove, and I proved it, the acceleration produced by a rotating spinning wheel is the spin of the disk multiplied by the rotation of the disk in RPMs, times by the square root of the hypotenuse formed by the radius of the disk and the radius of the rotation, and that gives you the acceleration. And you can use that formula now. And so any form of gyroscopic effect, spinning, rotating, gyroscopic balls, or just that shows some kind of lift, is basically a more complex version of this formula. And that's why I tend to believe the mechanical structures. The trick might be equivalent to introducing a rotation, but without knowing any details, we really don't know what's going on.
So where is the hypotenuse attaching to the disk? Is it to the end of the surface, or the center of mass, or some other?
So you have a rod, one side is a pivot, one side is a disk. At the radius of the disk that is spinning, and that rod with the disk on it is rotating. Okay, so you have the hypotenuse is formed by the length of the rod between the disk and the pivot, and the radius of the disk, and that is the hypotenuse. So the square root of
regardless of the shape of the disk or where the most mass of the disk is, if it has a bulge in the center, for example.
Yeah, well, I've not tested for different variations of the distribution of mass, but it shouldn't make a difference, because it's just simple radius and diameter, or the radius of the spin, radius of the rotation, that determine the hypotenuse. And the higher the spin, the greater the effect. The higher the rotation, the greater the effect. If you change the sense of the rotation, the acceleration reverses. It's either up or down, depending. It's orthogonal to the rotation. It's orthogonal to the rotation, and it's orthogonal to the spin. You have a force upwards or a force downwards, acceleration, not force, but acceleration. And it's in one of my earlier sessions, I explained it. Okay. This is the sixth and last paper, high energy electromagnetic field generator. requirements is high energy, vacuum energy. Requires microwave, high microwave emitters, high frequency microwave emitters. And it sounds similar to Roger Scheuer's EM drive. However, Scheuer's EM drive does not use vacuum energy. It's purely a microwave effect. At least it's supposed to be. So let's look at inferences. So Robert Nemiroff, believe with University of Minnesota, he used NASA's Fermi Gamma Ray telescopes and found 3 photons that came together within 2 milliseconds of each other, approximately 2 milliseconds of each other, between the first and the last. And they came from a gamma ray burst 7 billion light years away. So that basically says that there is no such thing as vacuum energy, because if there was vacuum energy, particles popping in and out of space, these 3 photons would have dispersed, and you would not have seen all 3 of them coming together. So any theory that has or makes claim of using vacuum energy is no longer valid, at least in my mind. And I talked to somebody in London who runs quite a big new energy organization, and she was saying that every experiment on new energy or over unity has failed. And this is a topic I can talk about.
Hey, Benjamin. Hey, just real quick, can you explain that? Because my challenge is that I've always kind of reserved the possibility for vacuum energy, but the research I've done, to me it just even though there are some people I really look up to who are researching it, I struggle believing that it's there. So I'm not trying to say that I don't agree with what you're saying, but I don't quite. Could you just explain again why it is that these 3 photons coming together for you disproves the existence of vacuum energy?
Because vacuum energy are particles popping in and out of space. And if 3 photons are traveling 7 billion light years, they should have hit some particle and collided and got reflected in some other direction. It is practically impossible. If vacuum energy does exist, it's practically impossible for 3 photons to arrive after having traveled 7 billion light years to arrive on this planet within 2 milliseconds of each other, because they must have been diffracted, reflected away. So basically,
but isn't it possible? Because my understanding is that most models have it that there's an equivalency between the virtual particles and the real particles as they're kind of popping in and out of the field. And so if you had a situation where the virtual particles, when they're in their virtual state, didn't interact with anything, and when they became real, were just replacing whatever it is that had just vanished, so you had this equilibrium, then would you still see an effect in the trajectory of the photon?
They are real particles, but of opposite signs.
Fair enough.
Okay. This is another problem. It's a problem of mathematics to have to be able to explain electromagnetic forces, and quantum theory has this thing called virtual particles. They don't exist. That's why they call them virtual particles. It's a mathematical construct. Okay, and in these are experimental observations. What Nemiroff showed was experimental observations. Those particles, those 3 photons, are traveling 7 billion light years with nothing to disturb them, which basically says there's no such thing as vacuum energy. Particles don't pop in and pop out. It's flat. It's empty.
No, it's a very interesting approach to it, and I don't have a direct relationship with Dr. Putoff, but I do have an indirect relationship, and I'm actually going to attempt to get him to answer this, because this is actually kind of interesting. So that's anyway. I don't mean to derail you, Benjamin. Nice work. I find it interesting.
I would like to hear his answer.
Yeah, no, so would I.
Okay. Negative mass. What I proved, this was in the, and I published it in 2013. What I proved is that negative mass cannot exist. Current theories basically says that for gravity to be repulsive, you need negative mass, because in the body of the theory, the formula, you have this big M, positive big M, which is the mass of the planet or star. And the only way to reverse the gravitational field strength is to invert the curvature of space, and that is by using a minus sign. The problem is, and it's Bondi who proposed negative mass, and I think his paper was published about 20 years ago. He used general relativity to prove that negative mass can exist. The problem is, you can construct an experiment based on his description of, you can construct a perpetual motion machine that rotates forever and ever and ever. You can generate power with that, which proves that negative mass cannot exist. But the other more important lesson is that general relativity is like a computer, garbage in, garbage out. So you have to be very, very careful. Theoretical physicists have to be very, very careful what they do with general relativity. You can prove anything and make it sound reputable by saying you use general relativity. So when anybody says negative mass cannot, negative mass is a requirement, you know, it's nonsense. At least in my opinion, it's nonsense. It's mathematical conjecture. And then my colleague, I talked about a little about him, Andrew Beckwith, earlier on in this session. And he looked at, because I had spent a lot of time, many years looking at all these things, he decided to look at LQBS warp drive theory. It's also based on general relativity. And basically he sums it up as this, and it's published in the Journal of Space in 2017, Journal of Space Exploration. I got his permission to quote him. It is the basic error with LQBS warp drive theory, and this is the change in the gravitational field around the spacecraft. This is what they propose, is that the axioms in the theory are that of a multiverse, multiple universes, but the theory itself is based on a single universe. So it's complete nonsense. And his words were a little bit stronger than that. But LQBS warp drive theory is complete nonsense. So anybody who says they can reach speeds of light and further than that using by warping gravitational fields, it's wrong. It cannot be done. Always go back to Lorentz Fitzgerald transformation and Newtonian gravitational transformation. That is the standard.
There was another comparison about this particular configuration where if you are able to do something like this, the best you could do is something similar to what an ion drive can do.
Yeah.
And so it's very slow to get going, very slow to stop, that kind of a thing. So you're limited by some of the same ideas.
Right. But what I was pointing out was there are fundamental errors in a lot of these theories. A lot of these theories can say a lot of nice things. They gain public attention, but there are fundamental errors in them. And so we have to spend a lot of time sifting through and figuring out what is really true and what is not.
Hey, Benjamin, are you at all familiar with Dr. Sunny White over at EagleWorks?
Oh yeah.
The reason why I asked is because, Alcobree's paper, I mean, he wrote that like as a grad student, and so it's not what he even does professionally. And I mean, he actually gave a talk in Monterey like 2 years ago. It's on YouTube, kind of giving an update on what he wrote, and he kind of explains that he did this as a grad student, and he hasn't really touched it since. And and he talks about the improbability of it actually being able to work, and he talks about the hurdles that exist that you would have to achieve to be able to get it to work, and you can tell like he's incredibly skeptical. But Sunny basically did actually take that and continue working on it and make some alterations and so forth. And so I was just kind of curious as to whether your friend's analysis of it included any of the new work that Dr. White had done on it.
No, if your axioms are wrong, your axioms are wrong. There's no amount of mathematics you can apply to it that'll make any sense. In fact, he was criticized, very badly criticized by another physicist out of here, somewhere in California here, in the Silicon Valley, I believe, for using terms like quantum string theory or quantum, some strange nomenclature terms he had come up with, and he was very badly criticized for doing that.
Yeah, but there was actually, I'm trying to think of the guy. I keep on saying Quagmire, but it's not. It's because there was a really terse interaction between Sunny and this guy at the end of a breakthrough discussion at Stanford in like 2017 or 2018. And I mean, basically, the guy started his question to Dr. White as saying, I just want to make it clear that when I'm talking to people about impossibility drives and free energy, that I like to kind of frame it in science fiction. I mean, he was like incredibly rude to him, and so I will say that I have a friend who was the former director of NASA Ames, and he's the one that actually introduces Dr. White in some of the talks back in like 2016. And so I will say that Dr. White has a lot of support and a lot of very, very, very vocal enemies. And to me, anytime you have that much polarization in a topic, it's at least interesting to research.
Yeah. The only comment I will say, because I've met almost most of these people through conferences, the only comment I would say is that I stay away from his stuff. Okay. So the inference from this analysis is that none of these papers are experimentally substantiated. There's a lot of conjecture that's been presented, but as Sabine Hossenfelder says, there's mathematics and there's physics. A lot of what theoretical physicists do is mathematics, not physics. So that's the same problem with these patterns. So one of the things that's very clear is that current theories cannot deliver UFO type technologies. So why these patterns? And I looked up uspto.gov, and they have a section for national security patents. You cannot access it. When you submit a patent, they will reference those patents to make sure you're not infringing on those patents. So why did the Department of Navy or the Department of Defense put all these patents out for public viewing? And I think it's basically two reasons: to keep Americans believing that their government is on top of this, and to keep foreign researchers occupied going down the wrong path. It's true.
Well, I mean, there's some evidence to that in that essentially there are multiple places in those patents where there are mistakes made that, to me, are mistakes that would have never, ever, ever passed any sort of peer review within his own organization. I mean, whenever I've done a patent, there's been, internal reviews, because no one actually wants to, submit a knowingly wrong patent. And so, to me, it's stuff that, it's almost like what some of the guys, in like the Enlightenment period used to do, where they would offer a design with an intentional, error that essentially, someone in the field would pick up on very quickly, but everyone else would just kind of gloss over as real, So there's a fair amount of that in those patents. I definitely agree that, that there's a good chance that those patents were published more for non-Americans than for Americans. However, with that said, I do see a very, and it's why I'm kind of enjoying your talk so much, is because you're kind of shooting holes in so many things. It's fun, because I mean, essentially, if you look back at say what Fouché was presenting on, and then you go forward to the sightings of the triangles, and then you go forward to the first patent you looked at, right, which was actually a while ago, right, and then you come forward now, and you got the Tic Tac, and then you have these 3 patents that were filed and so forth, and there is kind of a and the Alcubierre drive, and then the stuff that Harold White was doing, and then also the stuff that Eric Davis was doing, and you do kind of see, with the exception of Eric Davis, you do kind of see this interesting trend that seems to always include a basic concept of something rotating, whether it's a disk, whether it's a plasma, whatever it is, it's something rotating that essentially takes advantage of metamaterials and negative energy and negative inflection and so forth to essentially create a reduction in mass. And they do it in slightly different ways, but you can definitely kind of see a trend that goes across it. And what you've done is you've basically shot holes in all of that. And whether I don't know if you're right or not, but to me it's super fascinating, because if you are right, then you didn't just take out one of the possible ideas we have to explain this behavior. You essentially wiped out all of them, and which kind of, I mean, without what the work you're doing, kind of forces everyone to start from scratch. And I don't know, to me that's actually, I don't know if you're right or not, but to me that's incredibly exciting. So I think it's very cool, the work you're doing.
Yeah, thanks. No, for me, the data is important. If the data is not there, it's conjecture. If the data is there, then I can work with it. And therefore, I dig deep to try and find out what is the basic fundamental concept that's going on with these papers. I don't care about the mathematics, because a lot of the mathematics is not real. Okay, so let's look at this video, and you tell me what you think. So what do you guys think? Is this real?
So I don't that particular video, I have some concerns about. However, I have seen enough videos like that. I've seen enough photographs, and I've talked to enough witnesses that I do believe that there is a craft flying around that looks very, very, very much like that. I just don't have any confidence that that's actually film of the actual craft, or whether that was a faithful recreation done of something someone actually saw.
Okay. Anybody else?
One of the questions I had earlier when you were describing the patent of the triangular craft was, where's the field it's using to maneuver or push against? And that seems to have been demonstrated in the video by the central ball of light that shows up, that then expands. And it's bright and it's not very specific. You can't really tell what's going on, but you kind of need a toroid shape to envelop the craft from my research to be able to get that done. And so it seems like that's what they did and just phased out.
Yeah, that bright spot I cannot explain.
Well, and I should point out that there's only one video where that bright spot appears. All the other videos that I have of that triangle and all the other pictures I have of that triangle, unless there are pictures of that video, do not include that ball at the end. Now that could just mean that they didn't capture that state of the device. You know, I don't have no way of knowing, because this is the same, this is, in my opinion, the same ship that was involved in the Belgium flap. And that had a tremendous number of witnesses, including military engagement and police force witnesses over a period of time. I mean, it really kind of ran amok over there. I forget what year it was. I think it was 89 or something like that. And so, and those craft look very, very similar to the craft you're showing.
Right.
Yeah, there's a few other things to me that suggest this is a terrestrial built craft with people flying it, not advanced, computers or technology or something, because the transitions and the movement and the sort of chunks of time between different effects all suggest somebody figuring out the next step, running through some procedure or,
In addition to what you just said, there are some videos where you can get an angle on the top of the craft and it has vertical fins.
Yeah.
And
this one showed it as well. Yeah.
There's no practical reason for a, I mean, you're not going to put vertical, I mean, we're even getting rid of vertical fins now, but I mean, vertical fins are a pretty good signature of terrestrial. And so, and, I think you also have to add, there is some interesting anecdotal information in it. There was a report out of Iran, a defense writer wrote about it, maybe like, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, where they were complaining that they had interacted with a Mach 10 drone, that's what they called it. They claimed it was a Mach 10 drone. They claimed it was US, and they claimed that it not only was interfering with their airspace, but that it seemed to leave their airspace and enter orbit. It also interacted with some of their fighters, and they believe it actually took out one of their fighters. And this writer was basically complaining about this, saying that the Americans are messing around with us with this thing. And the thing I found interesting about it is that I'd never been to Iran, but I like one of my best friends growing up was from Iran, so I know a little bit about the culture and I know a little bit about their politics. And I have a hard time believing that they're going to brag in our favor, right? That they're going to like talk about us like having technology that we don't have that makes us look more advanced than we actually are. And so whether that was our craft or not, a Mach 10 plane in the way they described it actually very closely matches the TR-3B that's been described. Then you add to this, and this is probably the most anecdotal thing, and that is that in the book that TTSA published, the fiction book, there is a character that basically flies a triangle that has zero gravity and zero inertia and can hover and so forth. And one of the writers, the guy who actually wrote the book, not Tom DeLonge, gave an odd interview a couple years ago where he talked about writing the book and talked about researching it, and said that one of the problems he had was that he had no reference point for what a craft would feel like that didn't experience inertia. And what he claimed in the interview is that because of his relationship with TTSA, he was actually able to talk. And he claimed, I'll need to find it again because last time I found it was a couple months ago. But he claims that he was given permission to talk to a US pilot, and that US pilot was not allowed to tell him anything about how the craft looked, anything about how the craft performed, but he was allowed to tell him what it felt like to the pilot. And so he was able to interview this pilot about what it felt like to him to be in this craft. And that information is what was used to then write the story where he does it. And to me, it was very interesting that here you had a writer who, is just writing, fiction books, but for him to claim that essentially he had no information about what it felt like, and that he was actually given permission to talk to someone who knew what it was like to fly in a craft that could perform that way, was just an incredibly odd data point. And so I'm at the point now where it's my opinion that most of those Black Triangle sightings are actually an advanced U.S. craft.
I have another interesting description from somebody who claims to have information from parties who fly these ships all the time, and they're not terrestrial, right? And the way they describe the inertial effects is that, yes, you do go with zero, but it's not fun to fly a craft that you can't feel. And so they deliberately set the internal inertial effects to 98%, right? So that it's not 100% damped. You have about 2%. And then if you want to have fun, like really have fun, then you tone it down to 95 or so. But if you go any further, you risk damaging yourself and everyone else in the craft because there's too much inertia happening inside the craft.
Right. Okay. My observation from this video, what one of you said earlier on, you see the two fins here. So this is not a UFO spacecraft, not in the sense that we know. And so this is terrestrial, and I tend to think of it as a hot air balloon, very sophisticated hot air balloon, because I've not seen any of these traveling very fast. So that's my opinion.
No, I mean, personally, that's not what I think, but I think it's a very reasonable conjecture to make, because I mean, the behavior would be much easier to replicate with that kind of characteristic. I do have a video of it moving very quickly, but it's a highly suspicious video.
Okay.
I have yet to actually debug it. I've yet to find anyone who has debugged it, but the behavior looks so against what we consider normal that that it just looks. But I have to admit, I've seen the F-22 do things that didn't look normal to me too, and that looks fake. So I think it's kind of hard to use our own judgment on these things, but I mean, right now I think any hypothesis as to what's driving it is reasonable, especially because the predominant one is this idea that a circulating plasma at I forget what all the characteristics that Fouché gave. He gave a bunch of characteristics for what was going on with this plasma. Basically reduced 89%. So it's kind of interesting that Rob said 98, but that it reduced 89%, and that so essentially it was the craft only has to deal with 11% of its mass, and so that's why it essentially can achieve Mach 9, Mach 10 speeds, because you don't actually need to have super incredibly powerful engines to fling a ship around that only weighs 11% of what it is at rest.
Okay.
And and once again, I don't claim I have any evidence of this. I'm just explaining this is what is kind of a common hypothesis that gets brought up because of what Fouché reported. Unfortunately, Fouché has passed away, but his presentation is quite interesting.
Okay. See, mass is mass. You cannot change it. It's one of those things that's fixed. So if there must be some other explanation to why these things can travel that fast without changing the mass.
Yeah, it's not that the mass is changing, it's that the entire craft is being enveloped in a type of toroid.
Right.
And it disengages itself from the current reference frame in effect.
Okay.
And there's a secondary one that you can control within the craft, apparently, because the external and internal reference is, again, slightly different.
Okay.
And so you feel just like you're sitting where you are, if you want to, inside the craft, right? You maintain your mass and comfort and everything else at 100%.
Right.
If you start backing that off a little bit, then things begin to shift and you can feel it.
Okay.
It's mind-bogglingly frustrating that we essentially have, because Fouché did his presentation in, I think it was 98. So, and I believe he claimed that the ship was flying for a couple years. I don't remember when sightings really kind of took off, but essentially, we've had, 30 years of sightings and stories, and my friend knew someone who did this, and my uncle knew someone who did this, and I know someone who thinks this, and and the number of people who have seen a black triangle. To me, it's phenomenally frustrating that we've had 30 years of observation and from what I can tell, absolutely zero data.
Yeah.
I wanted to make a comment on the footage itself.
Yeah.
I find it odd that many of these footages lack clarity. They have unusual graphics coming, displayed on them or photoshopped into them. And going back to like your last several decades, this just could be government propaganda, and it could just be, going back to the Fermi's paradox, just to get humanity prepared for the eventual coming of a species of aliens to visit us. I don't think we've had that point in occurrence yet.
Yeah. But yes, some of these may be photoshopped, some of these may be real, but this is all we have to work with to figure out what's going on, or at least attempt to propose what's going on. And
I do think it's interesting that even if they are fake, that the people who are creating them seem to be taking extraordinary effort to create a consistent look and feel. And it's, to me, it's a little odd.
That's why I find it very odd. They all have a very similar look and feel and formatting, and the shaking, the zooming in and out, this blurring, a little graphics here and there, just very hoax-like.
Okay, depends on your point of view.
Maybe it's their most popular template they use.
Pre-developed by the U.S. government.
No, what I'm doing is I'm using these videos to try and deconstruct something. Can we rebuild back upwards, given all the stuff that I've
Did you see
done?
that one video that the Chilean Navy released in 2016? I found that very good. That was by, is anyone here remember what I'm referring to?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. That was a small, very fast traveling object, and actually seemed to traverse from air to water without losing speed. It was quite impressive.
Okay, I'm talking about the one that was actually invisible, and this experienced helicopter pilot, he was, in the skies, and he had realized that this was an invisible aircraft that was ejecting some sort of gas into our atmosphere. And the only reason he was able to witness it is because he was flickering on and off his infrared. If you pull up the Chilean Navy, you could find it very easily on YouTube. Chilean
Okay.
Navy.
Oh, that's very cool. I actually I hadn't heard that one. I'll look that one up. Thank you.
Can I share my screen really quick? It's like a 2-minute video.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me see. How do I share the screen?
And this seems to be like the only promising one out of like the many UFO videos out there. Just because there's no phony business, this is like an actually experienced aircraft pilot. And let me see how do I share?
Well, I mean, other than the fact that it was an invisible plane.
Hey, give me a second. I have to give permission for this application to record my screen. Just one moment. All right. Actually, can I just ping you the link and you can play it?
Okay.
On your screen.
The CEFAA, Chilean government agency.
Wait.
I'm gonna put it here in this chat for everyone. Oh, it's released in 2014.
Where am I?
Oh yeah, no, I'm watching it now. It's funny. I actually haven't seen this one.
So this is a good one in terms of UFOs. Because you could see that the pilot is really, really flustered. He's turning on and off his infrared, and he's like, what the hell is this thing that's freaking invisible, but I can see this UFO literally ejecting some sort of gas-like object into our atmosphere.
It's such a shame that there was no way to actually catch any samples from whatever was being ejected.
Okay, let me.
You're not sharing anything at the moment.
Yeah, I'm still not familiar enough with this. Here.
Hey, actually, everyone, I'm sorry to do this. I got to bail. It's 9 o'clock
No,
and I
this
got
is
a
not
4-year-old. So, but hey, this is really good information, Benjamin. Like I said, even the stuff I don't agree with, I really like your approach, and it's been a great conversation. And I appreciate everyone's book, and I'll
There's
catch
too
you guys
much.
later.
Okay. This is the video, right?
Yes, that's correct. Maybe you could put the volume up or unmute. I'm not sure if there's a volume control.
Okay. No, not yet. Your volume is at max.
Oh,
Okay. Can you see that?
yes, we can see.
Probably better to jump in halfway.
Benjamin, have you ever heard of a phenomenon like this where like UFOs like ejecting stuff?
No.
It's not quite clear that it was ejecting stuff, but that it did have some sort of temperature change effect in the
Right.
localized area.
Yep, that
That
could be. Yep, since it was an infrared.
Yeah.
The second video I put in is actually a bit better and clearer.
Let's see.
It doesn't have the other graphics from the Fox News or whatever.
There was some kind of related research I was reading a long while back about thinking about energy and electromagnetic fields that correspond with the right-hand rule, which is what we use today, and ones that correspond with the left-hand rule, which we don't use today. And that some of these craft might be using the left-hand rule, which, if this is true, then, for example, when we push a lot of energy through materials or wires, right, they heat up. There's resistance. The left-hand rule type of technology actually has the opposite effect. It cools.
Okay. I'm glad you brought that up. The existence of both left-hand and right-hand rules basically tells that there's something unclear in electromagnetism. It's either one way or the other, not both. So.
Or neither.
No, it is left-hand rule. I know for sure it's the left-hand rule because when I modeled electron moving in a magnetic field, it had to be the left-hand rule. It's just that under what conditions does the right-hand rule come into effect? I mean, when you start going to picking away at the details, then you start seeing these sort of things and you ask why is physics ambiguous about whether it's the left-hand rule or the right-hand rule? Okay. I'll play the other link.
Nowadays, it's hard to find the actual footage. All these other media companies will like chop it up and rewrite over it. But there was, if you can get a hold of it, there is somewhere circulating around the actual raw footage released by the Chilean Navy, and that's worth taking a look.
Okay. So, where are we now? Are we done? Do you have any other questions?
So what do you think?
No, I know there is a physics out there. I spent the last 20 years reworking the foundations of physics. So I know there is a physics out there that works. I have solved the gravity modification problem, and a couple of us, 2 or 3 of us, are hoping to build a prototype soon. The interstellar propulsion part, you need to know probabilities, because those are the only things in nature that bypass Lorentz-Fitzgerald transformation and Newtonian gravitational transformation. I've laid out most of the foundation for that, but I haven't got to engineering design principles. I know that you can remember in this talk earlier on, they said that an orthogonal electric field, one of the patents, orthogonal electric field can alter the photons electric field. Not the way it is. The work I've done is suggest that it has to be in line with the electric field to modify. It doesn't modify the electric field, it modifies the probabilities. So that's where I am now.
Okay.
I had a question. You mentioned early on that you thought the interstellar travel was impossible, or because of the Lorentz transform.
Yes.
Now, are you
Yes.
really saying that faster than light travel is impossible?
It's impossible because
You can still have interstellar travel, but just not at faster than the speed of light.
no, you when you use probabilities, you're no longer moving. You are in effect using probabilities to reappear somewhere else. There's no velocity, there's no motion. That's why you're not affected by these transformations. Do you get what I mean? You're bypassing all these transformations. Nature allows us to bypass certain things if we know how to do it.
So here's one perspective on some of that. That seems very close to the descriptions that I've come across.
Okay.
These craft function on frequency maps, right? And so they have to be able to map out the area that they want to travel to in terms of frequency. And then as soon as they have the ship tuned to that frequency, whatever the destination is, they simply appear at that destination, right?
Yeah.
So that is this teleportation type of effect. Okay.
I call it translocation.
Sure, translocation.
Okay.
There is another couple of things to consider. So portals and tractor beams are essentially the same type of technology. So something that was put out with Star Trek, right? We're kind of familiar with.
Yeah.
The technology in a transporter where you stand on the pad, right? And it's supposed to dematerialize you and materialize you somewhere else.
Yeah.
And they put fancy graphics in there for TV.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's instant. You don't really feel a thing other than the change of temperature and maybe sounds, right?
Right.
And so this is the same technology that ends up happening for tractor beams, which is these beams that are kind of more vertical in nature, very directional, right? And so you can translocate some object that you're targeting with this beam, right? And then the other ones are more these toroidal shape where they can envelop the entire ship, or you have these portals where it's like a doorway and you walk through the doorway and the same thing happens. So the main difference why you see a lot of ships is because getting these frequency maps to a high percentage so that all of the, like you say, probabilities can be calculated is very difficult. And so it's much easier and simpler to simply have an approximate frequency location, at which point the ship materializes there. And now you can fly the rest of the way through any medium, right? Be it air, water, or space.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. In terms of navigation, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Tractor beams is part of gravity modification. It's not part of probabilities. So once we start building the devices, all we have to do is change the configurations around and you get tractor beams. So it's part of gravity modification. But interstellar travel, I don't know whether portals do exist or can exist, or what kind of engineering will take. I suppose they could, because if you're dealing with probabilities, you need one door to start and another door to to exit, but that's how you implement the probabilities. It's not space-time. It's not space-time curvature. That's where my thinking is based on all the stuff I've done. That's where my thinking is. So there are two different phenomena. How you put the two together is quite something else. They're two different phenomena. One works for certain things, the other works for other things. Anything else? No? Yes? Was this a good talk?
Yeah, it was a good talk. Are you going to post a recording of it on?
Yeah. If the last time I had a problem with the recording, I hope there won't be a problem with this recording. But if the recording happens, if the Go meetings actually have a recording for me on the cloud, I will post it. I'll post the link.
Oh, okay, good. And also, do you have the document presentation?
Yes, the slides. I posted the slides, the link to the slides on the meetup group event.
Oh, okay, good. Thanks.
Okay. So, any other questions? Any other comments? No. So, shall we call it? Pardon?
Thanks
Shall
a
we
lot.
call it?
Thanks for doing it, Ben.
Yeah, welcome. I enjoyed it as well. I enjoyed all your feedback and your comments.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Good.
Thank you. Okay.
We'll definitely tune in for the next one.
Okay, thanks. Okay, see you folks. Have a
Okay.
good evening.